Wolverine's age in all movies despite the confusing timeline. X-Men Origins. The movie's first act remains unchanged by future events. In 1845, we see a young Wolvie, puppy if you will, sick because his mutant powers are beginning to kick in. Teenage Sabretooth exclaims, "You are always sick," to which Wolverine replies, "You were sick when you were my age." This lines up with the other X-Men films where it's stated mutant powers kick in during puberty or extreme stress with few exceptions. This lines up with the guidebooks saying he was born in 1832, and considering the scene where Wolverine's power manifests is in 1845, that would make him 13, which is a common age for this occurrence. Wolverine being born in 1832 means he lived through the first telegraph, telephone, light bulb, sewing machine, and more. Wolverine fought in the Civil War where he was between 29 and 33. He was between 82 and 86 in World War I. By World War II, he was between 107 and 113. This includes the time he was a prisoner of war in Japan and survived the Hiroshima blast. By the Vietnam War, he was 123 and 125 by the time the war finished. The film X-Men First Class takes place in 1962. Wolverine only has a brief cameo. Did you know PG-13 movies can only say the F word once? In this film, Wolverine had the honor of saying it at Magneto and Xavier, which Xavier fondly recalled when Wolverine came to him asking for help in Days of Future Past. In this movie, Wolverine was 130 years old. Young. Speaking of X-Men Days of Future Past, the story predominantly takes place in 1973. Wolverine's body is 141 years old. I say body because anyone who has seen the film knows a future consciousness inhabits his younger self. This is where it gets a little confusing, so hang on with me here. The Wolverine we see in the future takes place in 2023. Remember, in real life, the movie was released in 2014, so 2023 was the future. That makes future Wolverine 191 years old. He looks the same, but we see the first sign of aging. Without an illness, he most likely would have had a very long lifespan ahead of him. After changing the past, he returns to his rewritten future in 2023. Remember this, we will come back to this shortly. In the new rewritten history, Wolverine does not get recruited by Weapon X after Vietnam like in X-Men Origins. This time, in the film X-Men Apocalypse, Weapon X succeeds in where they failed in Origins. They wipe out Wolverine's memories completely. Jean Grey helps unlock some memories, to which we see Wolverine run away. The film takes place in 1983, making Wolverine 151 in this movie. In the year 2000, Wolverine joins the X-Men, where he becomes 168 years old, meaning filling out medical forms is beginning to get a little awkward. X-Men 2 is a little tricky to nail down because it was released 3 years later, but the story most likely takes place a year after. Wolverine returns after visiting a location to help piece together his past after Xavier helped him unlock some memories. He was most likely 169. This makes him the oldest veteran not collecting Social Security. In X-Men Last Stand, just 2 years passed, making him 171 years old. In The Wolverine, a film taking place after X-Men Last Stand in 2013, he reaches the age of 181 years old. We see flashbacks to him being a prisoner of war in Nagasaki, Japan in 1945, where he was 113 years old. The conclusion to Wolverine's story happens in Logan, taking place in 2029. He reaches the age of 197. So close to 200, but no cigar. I told you before to remember what happened to future Logan in Days of Future Past and its happy ending. Well, here is why. It's a common misconception that Logan is in its own separate timeline. The director, James Mangold, actually confirmed this himself. We are in the future. We have passed the point of the epilogue of Days of Future Past. We're finding all these characters and circumstances that are a little more real. The questions of aging, of loneliness, of where I belong. The Wolverine in Logan is the same Wolverine at the end of Days of Future Past. That means 6 years passes and Wolverine aged incredibly fast. So what happened? Wolverine's adamantium poisoning caught up to him, aging him rapidly. This is how he looked at 191, and this is how he looks at 197. He aged like a fine Obi-Wan Kenobi. As astute fans have pointed out, it most likely wasn't just the adamantium poisoning. GMOs were added to food and corn syrup to suppress the mutant gene and prevent a new generation of mutants from being born. We see Logan drinking heavy amounts of beer, many of which is often brewed using corn syrup. I personally believe Wolverine would have lived much longer if he changed his diet and used his powers and his abilities to sense anything that had corn syrup or additives. Even if that meant he had to grow food naturally or hunt himself, he's done it before. This man was born in the early 1800s, but we see throughout the film, he's highly depressed, and he's often contemplating thoughts of suicide. And honestly, many of his actions in the film were suicidal. Now, warning, spoilers ahead because we are going to talk about Deadpool and Wolverine. So, Wolverine's age from Deadpool and Wolverine is over 200. How could that make sense in the grander context of Fox Wolverine's birth year and the age he died? Here's how. First, let's acknowledge the obvious. The Wolverine we see in Deadpool and Wolverine is a variant, a different Wolverine from a different universe than the Wolverine in the Fox universe and X-Men series. It's a bit confusing because once Deadpool has the temp pad, he jumps between different timelines and different time periods, such as when he went to the future and desecrated Wolverine's remains. I say this is the future because we have 2 active X-Men casually hanging out with Wade Wilson earlier in the movie, and there is zero indication of additives in food suppressing the mutant gene or the X-Men being wiped out by Charles Xavier. Later in the film, we see him speak to Happy Hogan while discussing Tony Stark, who at this point is alive. Now here is where it gets a little confusing. We also get references to post-Endgame events. The TVA discusses how they don't prune timelines anymore as a result of Loki Season 2, and that would make this film take place after 2023. As of the release date of Deadpool and Wolverine, the established MCU year is in 2025. We know this because Hawkeye takes place around Christmas time of 2024, and Moon Knight takes place after Hawkeye. I believe the film takes place in 2025, meaning variant Wolverine would have had to have an earlier birth year for him to be over 200 years old. In order for the variant Wolverine to have the same birth year as Fox Wolverine, the film would have had to take place in 2032 or after. I feel like this is unlikely, but there are some fans that argue this film takes place after 2029. Evidence to support this include Deadpool using the temp pad to visit Logan's burial site. Many of us think he jumped to the future of his timeline, but there's plenty who don't agree. While in the void, Deadpool immediately recognizes X-23 in a non-joking fashion, which gives credence to this theory. So we know variant Wolverine is over 200 years old. The film either takes place in 2032, meaning Colossus and Teenage Negasonic Warhead are the last surviving X-Men, or this movie takes place more likely between 2023 and 2025. Quickly, some bonus material. Although retcon, the last act of Wolverine Origins when he gets adamantium claws and goes for revenge happens in the early 1980s, although it is never specifically stated. That could make him between 148 and 152. So that is Wolverine's age in every movie. Subscribe for more videos like this.
From Marvel to monsters, we cover it all. In the world of entertainment, we stand tall. talk now, join the fun and let's go. Disco lights are flashing, feel the energy flow. Discussing MCU, Godzilla and more. Movie talk now, we open the door.